Ladies and gentlemen, the celebration will begin in 10 minutes' time. Please begin to take your seats. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the celebration will begin in 5 minutes' time. Please take your seats.
Good evening. Good evening. There we go. What a delight it is to be here tonight to celebrate and cherish our dear Audrey Evans. My name is Dave Kasevich, and I have the honor of serving as the head of school at St. James. And we have a very full agenda tonight. Some of it you'll see at your seat. And Audrey, many of you know Audrey. All of you know Audrey in some form or fashion. But she would often, at the beginning of a meeting, say, let's get on with it. Let's just get this started. And so we're going to get on with it, and let's get started. Before we get started, we have a little surprise to share with you. And I think, Brendan, could you come on up here, please? How many of you, just by raise of hands, got an opportunity to visit the sheep? Great. Everyone visit this little lamb that was just born? Yeah. This little lamb was born maybe in the last couple days. And this little lamb, as of about an hour and a half ago, did not have a name. And the owners agreed to name this little lamb Audrey. That's right, we can clap for that. Thank you, Brendan. Everyone wave to the sheep. Bye, low lamb. I'm pleased to be here up here with Susan Campbell, the CEO of Ronald McDonald House Charities, the Philadelphia region. Because of Audrey, St. James and the house have had a special partnership over the years. The St. James van is a frequent visitor to the house. I know how pleased Audrey is to know that the two institutions are here tonight. In fact, she would say, I'm over the moon about it. We're here tonight to, yes, celebrate Audrey, but we're really here to honor the work and the care and love that she had for the children and families entrusted to her care. Audrey had a grateful heart, extremely grateful heart. Much more than most people. She knew that she had much to be grateful for. So in true Audrey form, we have to start with some thank yous. A huge word of gratitude for the following, for their overall support of tonight's event. And we'll hold the applause until the end. Anthony Rentals, Evie, Philip, and Olivia Dutton for bringing their horse. Fast Signs of Narberth, the staff at St. James School, and also the Philadelphia Ronald McDonald House.
We would also like to extend our gratitude to our friends at Jacobs Music for this beautiful piano, our friends at DeBruno Brothers, Robertson's Flowers, Rotation Records, and Mark Fisher Entertainment.
Yes, let's give them a round of applause. When you received the invitation for tonight, were you curious? Church Farm School. Why Church Farm School? Very curious, I hope you were, why we chose Church Farm School as the venue. You should know that Audrey had a lot to do with this choice of venue. In fact, we were in discussion with a number of other venues, and all of a sudden, everything pointed to Church Farm School. Audrey loved boarding schools and valued her own boarding school experience. Audrey loved animals of all kinds, and she felt very at home at a farm. Audrey loved the connection between St. James and Church Farm, and she was looking forward to our graduates attending school here. And we have two of our graduates are here. Where's Randy? Randy? There's Randy. Everyone, yeah, there's Randy. And let's give Randy a round of applause. And next to Randy is Neiman. There we go. There we go. They love this. Yes. Susan and I could not be more grateful to Church Farm School, and especially Ned Sherrill, their head of school, and their team for their enthusiasm for tonight's event. I'd like to invite Ned to say a few words and come up.
Thank you, David and Susan. It's pretty risky to let another head of school address a crowd like this, especially an educator and an Episcopal clergyman. So I figure I've got about 20 minutes. Is that okay? But on behalf of the board of directors, my colleagues on the faculty and staff, but most especially the scholars who inhabit Church Farm School, we're mostly a residential school, 130 young men Welcome to our campus. It's a beautiful campus, and today makes it even more glorious because of what's going on in springtime. I'm sorry it's a little warmer than might have been, but the thing to know just quickly about the school, as David said, we really want to be in line for young men like St. James produces to come here to go to school. We want to make a private school education, a college preparatory school education affordable to young men who typically cannot afford this kind of thing. They want to go on to college, and we'll see them through a college program in 4 to 6 years. That's sort of our goal in doing it. And the other thing that is a tribute to Audrey, she would have loved our founder. And our founder said, where God gives us a vision of what needs to be done, we're also given the ability to do it. And Audrey was all about that. Her achievements were all about vision, but of course, ability in meeting that. And the only thing that Audrey would say to me when we engaged in conversation about Church Farm School was, Ned, would you take a few girls? And so we're still an all-boys school, but someday that might change and Audrey would have everything to do with it. So we hope that you are comfortable, that you've made yourself at home here. You know where the facilities are. But again, welcome to our campus. We hope you'll learn a little bit more about our school and its mission and the great work we do together with good folks like David and Susan. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ned, for your commitment to your mission and all of the students. It's an honor to be with all of you tonight, both in person and our friends with us virtually, and to co-host with Dave. Dave and I have many things in common, including we were not Audrey's first choice in leadership when we were offered our positions running our organizations. After the Ronald McDonald House board voted for me to become the CEO over 15 years ago, Audrey came out of that meeting and said to me, I just want you to know I didn't vote for you. I'm not sure that you can do the job. Always up for a challenge, I invited her to join me for tea one afternoon so that I could learn what was most important to her. That was one of the best decisions I've ever made, and it led to a very special relationship.
Now, Audrey was not as direct with me about the selection. Her approach was a little softer with me, but she did say a few things when I was first hired. She would say, do you really know what you're doing? And then she said, I remember, in early September, after I was hired, she goes, what you really need is a good head mistress. But in the end, she agreed that she was a little wrong and that she became our biggest fans.
In true Audrey fashion, we'd like to offer an intention for tonight's celebration. When Audrey and I would attend a meeting, go to an interview, or be at an event, she would always say, and I can hear her in my brain now, well, why am I here, and what are we going to accomplish?
So tonight may appear to be just about Audrey, but actually tonight is about you. It's about me. It's about all of us and our collective work for the young peoples and families entrusted to our care. Whether that's at Ronald McDonald House or St. James, we do this work in Audrey's name and in her legacy. The intention for tonight is for all of us to think about this. So we invite you to think about your own commitment to children and families entrusted to our care. Whether you're watching virtually or live, we invite you to, tonight, recommit to something new. Recommit to doing something new for the children and families in our care. And we'll circle back. That's your homework. the next hour or so. I'd like to invite the Reverend Sarah D'Angelo White to the stage.
Well, good evening. Good evening. Throughout my conversations this afternoon and this evening, what has been conjured over and over again is the sound of Audrey's laugh. That full-bellied, hearty guffaw that she would let out when life amused her, which was often. There's one time in particular that keeps coming up. We were on a family vacation. Audrey was nearly 80. She and my grandfather had walked from our hotel to a restaurant, and upon arrival, Audrey dropped into a faint. She waited on the floor just long enough to send the waitstaff into a tizzy, and then she popped up, regaling us with her larger-than-life laugh and inviting us to laugh with her. This delicate woman false faint was, of course, an act. Woe to the man who underestimated Dr. Audrey Evans. As we all know, Audrey was fierce to her very core, fiercely determined to love children, fiercely determined to make it as a woman in a man's world, fiercely determined to create a family around her. I grew up with Audrey as my Aunt Audrey, my father's godmother, and a dear family friend. Then, after her marriage to my grandfather, Dan Danjo, Audrey became my grandmother, and eventually the great-grandmother to my children. These titles of grandmother and great-grandmother were ones which she and we adored. Even as she found it harder and harder to recall particular stories with great detail, she would look at me and say, "There's something I did for you once, something a grandmother would do." And I would remind her, "The lice?" And she would laugh and say, "Yes, I picked the nits out of your hair," as only a grandmother would do. I can't separate out my Aunt Audrey's example from all of the other influences in my life. But I can say that I am a proud woman in the traditionally male field of the priesthood. And I am the proud mother of 5 children, children who have joined my family through birth, through foster care, through adoption, a family fiercely gathered through love. I had a woman who cared in my life, and she in turn taught me how to care. I don't know how often she spoke of this, but Audrey had countless conversations throughout her life with children getting ready to confront death. She would ask them to imagine what glories they might find when they died. When I visited her for the final time, she held my hand, and she assured me in whispered tones, "Some people think it's sad, but it's not. It's happy. It's happy." So just as Audrey was happy, we shall be happy tonight. We shall laugh together as she laughed with us and sometimes at us. We shall remember together a woman who cared and who taught us to care. So as we begin, let us join with Audrey in a prayer that assures us of God's love and care. Let us pray. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me at the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen.
Thank you, Sarah. We thought it was important to share a little bit about Audrey's life as a child and her journey prior to coming to Philadelphia in 1969. And what better way to do that than to have Audrey tell us herself. This clip is part of a video about Audrey written and produced by Julia Fisher-Farbman, who you will meet later in our program. It was part of Julia's Modern Hero series, spotlighting extraordinary women, and when this video was released, it went viral with over 17 million views.
Audrey's journey began in 1925 in the historic walled city of York, England.
I grew up in a middle-class family. I had my mother and father, a sister who was 6 years older than me, a brother who was 2 years older than me.
From the time she was 5 years old, her path in life was clear.
I always knew I wanted to be a doctor. Fortunately, my parents believed that girls should do as well as boys, so off I set on this rather tortuous business of graduating to be a doctor.
So off she went to the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh. But learning the material was far from easy.
I never excelled in school because I have a memory problem. Most people learn things from what they read, and I remember things from what I hear. And so I had trouble in medical school. I failed my first year in anatomy. So to regroup, somebody taught me anatomy verbally. We looked at pictures and he talked.
Wow.
I literally scrambled through until I got to the clinical part. I could talk between the medical staff and the families.
A great connector.
I was a good connector, that's true.
Audrey finished her degree in 1953 and headed to Boston Children's Hospital, where she spent 2 years of her residency on a coveted Fulbright fellowship. She trained under pathologist and leukemia pioneer Dr. Sidney Farber, also known as the father of modern chemotherapy. In 1955, she spent 1 year at Johns Hopkins before heading back to England to the Royal Infirmary Teaching Hospital, where for a period of time she was the only female resident among the guys.
You were outnumbered by the guys. So what was that like? Did it affect you?
Well, I guess I thought perhaps I would have got on better if I'd been a man, but it didn't worry me. I managed to do what I wanted to do. I just sort of laughed at it.
That must have been hard, though, being the only woman.
No, I guess I wouldn't call it hard. More amusing.
You really love what you do.
I loved what I did, and I was having fun. I just knew where I was going. I was on a plan. I was lucky to be there. I was well aware of that.
After completing her residency, Audrey packed her bags and headed back to Boston Children's Hospital, where she found her true calling, treating kids with cancer. In 1964, she carried that passion to the Hematology Oncology Unit at the University of Chicago. And 5 years later, she was recruited by C. Everett Koop, the former Surgeon General of the United States, as the first chief of pediatric oncology at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where she later founded the Children's Cancer Center and ultimately spent the remainder of her medical career.
And what was that like coming to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia?
It was a perfect job for me. I was taking care of sick kids, and I was listening to this sermon at church, and God calling a woman who cared. And I thought, wow, that's who called me. So I'm going to have tears now. So I knew at that sermon, God, that's why I came to Philadelphia, to take care of children with cancer, because at the time I came, there wasn't much else you could do but care.
Our first group of speakers met Audrey when she arrived in Philadelphia in the late 1960s and early 1970s. They represent parents of grateful patient families and represent Audrey's unwavering commitment to supporting the entire family. I'd like to invite to the stage Sue Menkowitz.
Audrey Evans means the sun, the moon, and the earth to me and my family. She was the most caring human being I have ever met in my entire life. It is an honor to share our story of Audrey and to represent all of the grateful families that she has touched. I met Audrey Evans in 1971 when my son Scotty was 3 years old. Within a 5-week period of Scotty experiencing pain, he was diagnosed with neuroblastoma. My husband Elliot, as a physician, learned that Dr. C. Everett Koop at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia had some success in surgically removing secondary tumors, and it reduced the size and growth of the primary tumor, and in some cases it actually disappeared. Scotty had stopped walking and was admitted as an inpatient to Children's Hospital at that time. Dr. Koop was away on vacation for 2 weeks. Given his reputation, we waited for him to return, and Scotty was an inpatient at that time. Dr. Koop returned and evaluated Scotty's case. Elliot and I met with him as our surgeon and Dr. Audrey Evans as our oncologist. Elliot introduced me to Dr. Koop, and Dr. Koop then said something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. He said to us, if this were our son, I would do absolutely nothing and he will be dead in 6 months. Without hesitation, Audrey instantly responded to Dr. Koop, I am sorry, I don't agree with you. These words will also, I will never forget. And then she turned to us and she said, you owe it to yourselves as parents to at least 1 course of chemotherapy to see if he responds. Audrey gave us an extra year with our son that we will cherish as a family forever. Our family of 5 at that time were able to create wonderful memories, and most of the time Scotty was able to live as a normal 3 or 4-year-old. Scotty passed away when he was 4.5. During his treatment, we would take him to the clinic for testing or treatment, and he, like the other children, would be scared and very often start crying. Audrey would take the kids, put them on her lap, calm them down, and it didn't matter how many other kids were waiting. She did it for all of them. For the last 50 years, Audrey has been part of our lives, and I had the opportunity to truly get to know her. Although she never had any biological children, Audrey would always say her patients were her children, and she loved each and every one of them. She gave us a gift, and has impacted many lives. Her caring nature was infectious, and she impacted my life and my priorities. My husband Elliot and I adored Audrey. Over these many, many years, until her health failed, we would constantly take Audrey out for dinner, and then Audrey and Dan out for dinner all the time. My family and I will never forget her. Okay.
We'd like to invite Ginny Peltz and then Judy Bloor up to the stage.
Thanks. Well, I look out and I see a lot of familiar faces, and I say hello to you all. Excuse my voice, I've been sick, but I'm here, and if my voice fails, my son David will pick up for me. Let me start by saying how thrilled I am to be back in the Philadelphia area and to see so many of you after such a very long time. I'm happy to be able to speak with you for a few minutes, as my years working with Audrey were very special for me and will never be forgotten. I've chosen 3 stories, relatively short, which I hope will make you smile as they make me smile in my memory. I met Audrey soon after her arrival at CHOP. She had a plan for the newly formed Division of Pediatric Oncology, which was developed on the concept that a child with cancer is a family with cancer. As such, Audrey's ambition was to provide care for the total family, and she wanted a chaplain, a social worker, a play therapist, and other professionals other support staff on her team of caring professionals. I began working for Audrey under the supervision of her then social worker, Joan Herman, who was sadly supposed to be here today and is not. My relationship with Audrey grew quickly into a friendship, and many memories of those years range from incredibly sad and poignant to charming and humorous. I've been asked to recall for everyone a few of those stories which are particularly memorable. I vividly, and I mean vividly, remember the December morning in 1973 when I picked up Audrey to go on our first foray into the real estate world to look for a house. We were about to move to the new hospital, and having just been designated a regional pediatric oncology center, we knew that the need to provide housing for the many new families who would be coming from great distances was going to be a problem. The first house we visited was being used for student housing by the University of Pennsylvania. Imagine the scene as we walked into this half of an old twin house. It was 9 a.m., all the shades were drawn, remember the year, and in the haze that filled the rooms, made to appear almost otherworldly as it filtered through the sunlight, we could see many sleeping bodies all over the floor. There was a pungent odor that made me feel somewhat nauseated, and the smell of cat urine was pervasive. Occasionally, a feline creature would emerge from the haze to rub against our legs, which delighted Audrey. I'm not a cat fan. Despite these conditions, which were hard to look past, we could see that the house had at one time been an elegant residence with its mahogany woodwork and beautiful architectural features. As we left the house, Audrey asked what I thought of it, and I responded that it was difficult to see that we could create a welcoming home for children and their families in such a place. When I asked Audrey simply how we could pay for such a house, she answered in her inimitable, optimistic way, "Well, you just save children and cancer and things happen." Well, of course, Audrey was right, and the Philadelphia Ronald McDonald House opens doors at the same house at 4032 Spree Street on October 15th, 1974, thanks to the generosity of our legacy donors, many of whom are here tonight. Story 2. As the plans for the outpatient clinic in the new hospital took shape, it became clear that Audrey's grand plan included a very large walk-in bird cage for the many colorful finches Audrey loved. Needless to say, there were many in the medical community who questioned the wisdom of having birds in the same clinic where children with cancer were being treated. However, not Audrey. She was not to be deterred, and the bird cage with its finches, many finches, delighted both children and their parents for years. Picture this. Each morning, well before the children and families arrived at the clinic, Audrey would enter the cage to clean it. Well, who else would do it? Talking to her birds all the while, chirping at them and enjoying. She took delight in this daily ritual, and I did too. And I loved inspecting Audrey's hair and clothing for any bird droppings that might have landed on her before she was to begin her morning rounds. We always giggled like schoolgirls during this daily exercise. We were undoubtedly quite a sight. And lastly, I smile as I recall the evening. There was a party at our home for the Ronald McDonald House Board of Directors to present to Audrey, as a surprise, a portrait of her done from a photo. It was a beautiful spring evening, and everyone was outside at the rear of the house. The portrait was hanging inconspicuously covered by a sheet on the back of the front door, which is open so no one could see it. About an hour and a half into the party, we thought we should make the presentation, and the guests were gathered into the front hall, facing the open door. Everybody but Audrey. It was quickly obvious that Audrey was not among the guests, and a search began. Everyone dispersed, some looking around the house, searching in every room, while others went outside to comb the neighborhood while calling her name. Alas, no Audrey. Having exhausted all our search options, I decided to call her at her home. In her upbeat, perky voice, she started to tell me what a lovely party it had been, and as I was trying to interrupt her to ask her why she had left without telling anyone, she explained, well, she'd had a lovely time, but felt it was time to go home, and I just didn't want to make a fuss. After taking a very deep breath and trying not to sound too upset, I informed her that indeed the party had been in her honor, and that there was a portrait of her that was to have been unveiled in front of her. "Oh dear, shall I come back?" she asked, genuinely feeling a bit contrite. I said no, of course, and promised to bring the portrait to her the next day. I believe that portrait, a lovely pastel, which Audrey saw and loved, except she said, "That doesn't look like me at my mouth, does it?" That portrait still hangs in the mansion at the Ronald McDonald House on Chestnut Street. And so I could go on telling such stories, but my time is limited. Suffice it to say that it was my honor and my privilege to have worked for her as her social worker for 25 years, and I am forever grateful for having had that opportunity. Thank you.
I was Dr. Evans' first employee when she began to set up the first oncology department at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I was her lab tech and had to begin setting up the lab and ordering furniture and supplies and equipment. But also, she didn't have a secretary yet, so I stepped in, I ordered office supplies and furniture. I even did some typing for her, which is not my strongest skill. I got to watch Dr. Evans in action, in the clinic, on the ward, and in her office. She would be leading a parade of medical students and residents around the hospital hallways. When a little patient had something to talk over with her, she would change her body into a diminutive shape and get up close to her patient. And while she was doing the physical exam, she was also talking with the patient about their concerns. When done, she would stand up and square her shoulders and continue then the teaching parade. The way our space was arranged in the old hospital on Lombard Street, anyone coming to see Dr. Evans in her office had to go through my lab. Couples would make this trek on their way to talk with her about the child's diagnosis. They would enter scared about what's going to happen, and they would leave stunned about what was happening. She was quite aware that they heard very little of what she had to say after she'd said, "Your child has leukemia." But she invested the time in them anyway to explain what the disease was and what she was going to do and how she was going to take care of the child and what the prognosis was. She knew that she would invest an hour and a half or 2 hours in this conversation, but she knew that she would be repeating the information and support again and again for the parents' sake. This is one of the ways that she was taking care of the child and the family. After working as Dr. Evans' lab tech, I ended my career at the hospital in the spring of '72. And in the fall of '73, she called us and explained her new idea for taking care of the family, to have a house, a safe place, an inexpensive place where the family could live for the days or weeks of treatment. A place that didn't cost very much. She invited my husband and I and family to be a part of this endeavor. Part of the original concept was that our family would make the difference between just lodging and a home. We would live in the house, make it a home. Our kids in their PJs and our dog were essential parts of achieving this goal. We quickly signed on to the project to give it a try for at least a year, and we stayed for over 12 years at the first Ronald McDonald House in the world. One of the first guests was a single mom from the Poconos, and her, I'm estimating ages, her 8-year-old son, who needed a few weeks of radiation. There was no way she could have driven daily from home to get the treatment, nor could she afford to stay in a nearby hotel, and that wouldn't have been comfortable for her son or her. Soon after that, we hosted a family from the Philippines. Their son was in his early teens, needed treatment for a brain tumor. In the Philippines, medical treatment consisted of comfort measures. In Philadelphia, there was actually treatment available to fight the disease. CHOP agreed to accept this family only because the Ronald McDonald House was available to provide housing. Without that, the financial burden on the hospital would have been too much. As Audrey used to say to colleagues, "I can do better medicine because I have this house." As I recall, the young patient did well with his treatment, and the family went home whole. I mentioned that Dr. Evans was very approachable. She made kids comfortable with her. And I want to tell one little story. My daughters were taking care of themselves. I don't remember why I was unavailable to them at this time, but one was having some kind of trouble, so the other one thought, "Who can I call?" Well, of course she thought of Dr. Evans, you know, the world-class oncologist. And Dr. Evans took this phone call from this distressed 12-year-old. She listened to my daughter's concerns and recommended, make a cup of tea and wait a little while. And I agree that a cup of tea, like Susan, you know, is a solution to many maladies in life. So Dr. Evans taught me a lot. She showed me humility and confidence. I can tell you the humility story if you want. She had a vision of how to treat seriously ill kids, that you do many things to take care of the family as well as the child. And for the most important thing she taught me is this: if Dr. Evans ever asks you to do something, just say yes. You'll be blessed.
fun or more tolerable. As far as I was concerned, anything that anybody wanted to do would go. One child who wanted to bring a bunny into the hospital with her. And I said, that's fine, go ahead and bring your bunny. And this particular child, in radiation therapy, she would not lie still and they couldn't treat her. And next time she came, I had to go with her. She said, well, can I take my bunny? I said, of course you can take your bunny. So Audrey and the child and the bunny in the cage. It's a long, long way. It's a very long hospital. It's about 2 blocks practically. So she goes along swinging her poor bunny in the cage. So she goes straight in. She goes to the table. She upends the bunny on the table. The bunny goes like this, The radiation therapy technicians are sort of, what's this? I said, the bunny's come to have his treatment too. Oh, yes, She leaves that. She climbs up the seat of one of the technicians, looking through the window. She says, now, Bunny, you have to be quiet. So the bunny's terrified, and so he's just sitting there like this. So she waits a few minutes, and just gets down off there. She goes back, now, Bunny, you're all done, okay. So she leaves the bunny in the cage down there. She climbs, I don't know how she climbs on the thing. She lies back. She pulls up her shirt like this. She said, okay. And they're all going. And so as we leave with the bunny in his cage, having had his treatment, and she's going on happily, I said, that's how you give radiation therapy. And they're all So I think we took the bunny for the rest of the treatment.
Thank you to Sue, Ginny, Judy, and the bunny for sharing your stories with us. In addition to Ginny and Judy, Audrey shared her vision for a house with several other unlikely partners. Philadelphia Eagles tight end Fred Hill and his wife Fran, Stan Lane, founder of Eagles Fly for Leukemia, Philadelphia Eagles owner Leonard Tose, and general manager Jimmy Murray, Stanley Elkman and Don Tuckerman of Elkman Advertising, and McDonald's regional president Ed Renzi. Collectively, this group of people came together to make sure that her idea became a reality, and the first Ronald McDonald House in the world opened on October 15th, 1974, here in Philadelphia. Audrey always said that a sick child is a sick family. That powerful conviction was the vision that changed how we support families of seriously ill children. She has literally changed the world and impacted the lives of millions of children and their families. Once the house opened in 1974, Audrey started to share with her colleagues the concept at conferences, including with her colleague, Dr. Edward Baum in Chicago. Dr. Baum was also committed to supporting families, and with the help of a grateful family, the Marinos, and the Chicago Bears, and McDonald's owner-operator Bill Chunowitz, the second Ronald McDonald House opened in 1977. And as they say, the rest is history. There are now more than 380 Ronald McDonald Houses worldwide, and programs in over 60 countries and counting. At the same time, Audrey was a pioneer as a researcher of neuroblastoma, always working to change the story of the survival rate of her patients. This next group of speakers represent her trainees and her colleagues. I would first like to invite onto the stage Dr. Christina Cole, and then John and Yael to follow.
It goes without saying, Audrey was a giant in the field of pediatric oncology. But really, what does a pediatric oncologist do? We certainly know that we hear how she was a clinician. She cared for children, the most vulnerable children, at a time where really we weren't, or they were not able to always cure children. And so what they would do is, no matter what, you could care. She was an incredible researcher. You'll have an opportunity to hear from John about the impact that she made on the field of neuroblastoma and many diseases. internationally, nationally, as a giant in the field. But she was also a teacher. She would have worked with trainees, residents, students, lab technicians. She would have made a mark on the career of thousands of individuals in her lifetime. And she was a mentor. As you all have heard, we all emulate. We love to watch the life that Audrey lived, to hear about how she touched the lives of others, the way she was able to not only have an incredible career, but an incredible life. So I'd like to just also mention some pearls or some lessons I've learned from Audrey and say thank you for those. As we've heard before, she taught us all that patients and families should come first in our practices. And it does sometimes take time. I can imagine I have times when my nurses are knocking on the door, but we have to take time. We have to connect with these people, build that trust, because they really do need to trust us. I've also want to thank Audrey for teaching me to listen to children. As Sarah talked about earlier, she said, take the time, not just walking in, talking to the family, making the plans, because sometimes it's tempting to do that, but listen to them, especially in that time when there will be a potential that they will die of their disease. They know things that we don't, and we can learn so much from them. And finally, I really appreciate that she's talked about how we need to allow the love that we get from spirituality and faith as part of our practice, but not just what we do in our jobs, but when we leave the hospital, that we take it out to the world, that we care for people, whether it's going to be making a meal before coming to work, as Audrey did when she was making soup in the morning to feed the hungry, but also to always look out for children, care for their education, and to bring that life forward.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Marison. This is Dr. Yael Mosé, and we would love to believe that we are physician-scientists built in the ilk of Dan DiAngio and Audrey Evans. I'm going to speak briefly about Audrey's academic impact. Before I do, I just want to emphasize the fact that I consider myself incredibly lucky that at the young age of 21 years old, I was given the opportunity to meet Audrey and Dan and then forge a 40-year relationship that went from student to mentee to colleague and then dear friends, and I'm very appreciative for that. We in research don't use the word shepherd a lot, and we've used the word shepherd talking about Audrey many times, but her most lasting legacy as a researcher is her ability to shepherd to get results. Childhood cancer is thankfully rare, and Audrey and Dan recognized in the 60s and 70s that the only way to make progress was to bring people together, to collaborate and to share. And how she grew into be one of the leaders then and always would be viewed as a leader was this uncanny ability to get the right people in a room to talk about an important problem. We've heard how she runs meetings. She would get to the facts, she would write it down, she'd make an action plan, and things would happen. It was really amazing to see this throughout her lifetime, especially in the early years when she was often the only woman in the room. Research can be competitive, and Audrey was very competitive. She published a lot of papers, she wrote and got a lot of grants. But tied to her being a shepherd is something else that is really remarkable in the neuroblastoma community. She really taught us to be a family. Audrey had the idea back in 1975 to bring together the people interested in this disease and making progress. I think there were a dozen people in the room at the very first meeting at CHOP in 1975. As these meetings evolved, it was very clear that she cared about every one of us, and we cared about her, and she really created this family. So it's somewhat fitting that in 4 weeks, Christina, Yael, and I are flying to the next International Advances in Neuroblastoma Research meeting. It'll be the first one without Audrey. It grew from those couple of dozen people in the 70s. There'll probably be about 1,000 people at this next meeting. We plan a celebration of life for Audrey at that meeting, and she will be very missed there. But she has really created something that is amazing, and everyone who's going to be at this meeting is going to want to follow her in her footsteps and eradicate the pain and suffering of childhood cancer. Audrey showed us the way, and we'll continue to follow. Thank you.
The importance of role models in medicine cannot be understated. Role models to inspire, motivate, and educate through example. Female role models throughout my career have been particularly rare. I was so privileged to meet Audrey in her last decade of life and shared with her many private moments seeking to find out more about the challenges for women in medicine. I've thought a lot about what adjectives I would use to describe Audrey. The quintessential adjective for a Jewish woman is valor, defined as strength of mind and spirit that enables a person to encourage and encounter danger with firmness and personal bravery. Audrey was truly a woman of valor. She strived to win a battle while balancing her own needs and those of others. She always opened her mouth with wisdom. I remember just sitting by her side and simply rejoicing in her until her very last day. Audrey was impelled by a sense of duty and a need to heal. She made her way to the front lines. She gave me a new definition of courage and commitment and has really become a role model for women in medicine, one who is strong, righteous, true in affections, and a lifetime of dedication. I think as women, we are often so good at tearing ourselves down that we forget that we were created to be warriors. Audrey was a valiant woman who changed the fate of an entire field of medicine. She was a star not because of what she did, but how she did it with valor. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, John, and Yael. Our next group of speakers are what we like to call the adventures with Audrey. Audrey had many passions: lambing, horse riding, scuba diving, and traveling the world. A way to step out of the realities of her profession and enjoy other aspects of life. I would like to first invite Richard Buchanan to the stage and then Evie Dutton.
Good evening. My dear Aunt Audrey became my godmother through her long association riding with my family, not far from here. My role in her life was to be one of the several kids she borrowed from time to time for worldwide travel in the absence of any permanent fixtures of her own. This was the greatest opportunity for me and my compatriots like William Durham and a few other lucky souls. Starting in about 1975, when I was 10, my brave parents shipped me off to Cape Cod for my first solo plane ride, and I was met by Audrey for a couple of weeks on Cotuit on the Cape with her friends the Potters and the Durhams from Scotland, plus assorted others, generally medical students and friends. Our journey continued as a road trip to the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. Big adventure for a 10-year-old. We got our first glimpse of Audrey the sailor, Audrey the field marshal, and Audrey the travel planner. In each capacity, she exhibited the joy for life, willingness to explore the unknown, and to the horror of my homebound family, a ducal indifference to risk, which generally led to exciting outcomes as far as we young lads were concerned. Subsequent travels about every 2 years followed well into my 30s. We went to Scotland to spend August with the Durhams at Scotsburn, took the Highlander train to London, stayed at the Domus Medica to explore the London of her youth, and we went to Greece with an extended range of the Durham family. In Greece, Audrey expanded her sailing enthusiasm, taking then 16-year-old Richard and William east into the Ionian Sea. A sprightly wind carried us further east with vigor into rising waves. The Greek Coast Guard came alongside and reprimanded us that to go further would risk being washed ashore in Albania, never to return. Audrey's prompt response was to throw them a line with the firm instructions to tow us back to Corfu, whereupon she sat down facing the opposite direction in anticipation of compliance. Greek sailor protests of "not my job" were ignored, and we were home in no time. Later, when I asked her how she knew they would comply, she taught me one of her great lessons: speak with confidence, accept no resistance, and it will turn out fine. Scuba diving was a passion, so she announced that a scuba diving certification was required for her next outings, and off we were to Australia, Virgin Gorda, the Maldives, all kinds of wonderful places. When I was an undergraduate in Italy for a year, Audrey came to Rome for a pediatric oncology conference and invited me down from Florence. The following day at the hotel, she suggested I put on a tie as we'd go see the Pope. I was delighted at the thought of seeing Pope John Paul in his balcony from St. Mark's Square. With Audrey, the adventure is always something more. She found the appointed door in the great city wall of the Vatican. We were admitted by a senior papal servant and led up through the halls and chambers of the Vatican to an impressive audience chamber. It turns out we were to attend an audience with His Holiness to share his gratitude for the work of the global leaders in oncology. Following his address, he rose and stepped into the gathering to greet the physicians individually, and there's actually a picture of her there. I think I was peeking over her shoulder in that photograph. And I always felt I committed a sin of omission by not alerting the Pope that I was not a pediatric oncologist, but just some kid who showed up off the street. Audrey thought that was hysterical. So, in my many and varied travels we enjoyed, Audrey's curiosity and joy in life was a constant. It occurred to me only later that these trips were the recovery she required to keep up a lifetime of work in oncology. Pivotal in the course of my life was her honored, non-parental presence. While I was grappling with what to do with my life as an undergraduate, lost in a sea of youthful opportunities but weighed down by the potential work associated with them, Audrey was the stern voice of action. Why be a carpenter when you can be a craftsman? Why be a draftsman when you can be an architect? Why are you sitting there on the couch when you could be working towards a goal? While my parents might have been satisfied if I could just get off the payroll and feed myself reliably, Audrey demanded a higher standard of achievement throughout my life. Duly chastened to keep a move on, I went off to graduate school in architecture, got to work, and eventually founded my architecture firm. Audrey, for whom my elder daughter is named, has been for 50 years a force of greater achievement and higher goals in everything that I do. I thank her constantly for her extraordinary influence on my life. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Evie Dutton. My husband, Philip, and I were lucky to call Audrey our friends for over 20 years. Audrey came into our lives one late afternoon over 20 years ago. Philip was checking on the horses in our barn in West Grove, and he saw a distinguished elderly lady walking down the aisle. Philip greeted Audrey and said, "Can I help you?" Audrey smiled and simply replied, "No, thank you." She proceeded to walk down the aisle looking at the horses. Philip soon realized that Audrey had owned a horse we had just bought from a fellow event rider. Audrey decided to come see the horse and see where he was living, and then she was going to move on. But that chance encounter led to Audrey owning some 3-day event horses with us, and many shared experiences watching Philip compete all over the world and to our decades-long friendship. We had many memorable trips with Audrey with the horses. The most fun was when we went overseas. One of my favorite memories is when Philip competed at the Athens Olympics in 2004. Audrey didn't own this particular horse, but she wanted to join us. She was always game for an adventure. She brought her then 16-year-old niece, Jennifer, who, like Richard, must have been on one of those trips, like, I'm going to take you on an adventure. So we rented a house with a group of friends in the resort town of Porto Heli, which was close to the Olympic Park and right on the water. We spent the week thoroughly enjoying the Mediterranean lifestyle, eating figs, freshly caught fish, and drinking delicious wine. Of course, we also spent each day cheering on Philip at the Olympic Park. When you go to the Olympics, it is not easy to get access. You often have to, roads are closed, and you have to go to a parking lot, catch a bus. It can take up to 2 hours. Audrey was not daunted at all, and she just said, "I'll see you there." And off she would go in the blazing Greek sun with her sun hat and sensible walking shoes. Jennifer and I laughed a lot about looking after the aunties, or not in hindsight. Apart from being a great cheerleader, Audrey was an accomplished rider in her own right. She enjoyed coming to Unionville on the weekends to escape the city and the demands of her job. She did this regularly, and when her schedule permitted, we were the lucky recipients of her many visits. However, oftentimes I didn't know she was coming. One day I was in the local supermarket and I ran into Audrey. I was really surprised to see her. I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Well, in her sensible way, it's much easier to buy groceries in the country than it is in the city." But then, more surprisingly, she whispered to me, "Do you want to know a secret?" And I, yes. Anything that Audrey says I wanted to know. She said, "I'm getting married." I was so excited, and she said, "Well, I thought I should do it before I turned 80. As we all know, Audrey married her beloved Dan, and they spent many happy years together. But we also know that Audrey was extremely stubborn. Audrey was well into her 90s, and she wanted to have one last ride. This was completely against Dan's wishes. She came to me and asked me to make it happen. Can anyone say no to Audrey? We had a quiet horse in the barn, and under strict instructions not to tell Dan, I organized for Audrey to come ride. I was terrified something was going to happen on my watch, but thankfully she successfully guided the horse around the arena. Once she dismounted, I started breathing again and looked at Audrey's ecstatic face. She had the look of pure joy. She once told me that riding was pure heaven, and that is what she looked like. Some of our most memorable times with Audrey and Dan was when Philip and I would go into the city and stop and see them in their apartment in Rittenhouse Square. We did this as often as we could, but mainly each year to celebrate our anniversary. We would stop in with a bottle of Audrey's favorite champagne and catch up. Audrey always wanted to talk about the horses, and we always wanted to talk about what was going on with her. These simple evenings are our most cherished. Audrey was blessed to have many passions and loves, many who are here today to celebrate her remarkable life. Philip and I were blessed to know Audrey and share just one facet of her life, her love of horses. Thank you.
Audrey and Dan's announcement of their wedding came quietly and without a lot of pomp and circumstance. Within a few weeks of sharing this news with Evie and others, they were wedded at an early morning mass at St. Mark's on Locust Street. The officiant was the Reverend Rick Alton, and guests included Barbara Alton and Nancy Potter, her friend, possibly a few homeless people, and possibly a few church mice. Enjoy this clip that we found of some interaction between Audrey and Dan about their memory of life together.
She worked closely with Giulio D'Angio, the radiation oncologist at Boston Children's Hospital.
And Dan was in oncology and tells you the story.
In about 1954, I would think.
That the first time he met Dr. Evans, she was sitting at his desk.
Going through my mail. Sets the tone. There she is.
Well, I mean, I went down to see him in his office.
Said, oh, hello.
He was looking through his mail.
And we developed a very close working relationship.
There's that laugh, yes. In 2009, at age 84, Audrey packed up her office during the Christmas break, and shortly after, on the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer, it was announced, Dr. Audrey Evans, world-renowned pediatric oncologist and Ronald McDonald co-founder, retires. Many were wondering, what could be next for Audrey in her retirement? For Audrey, even though she was stubborn, she was good at seeking advice and counsel and praying regularly. It was a part of the pattern of her life. Father Sean Mullen, her parish priest, became her listening ear during what was a challenging time in her life. We're so pleased tonight to have Father Mullen with us, and also Brother Bernard Delcourt, a Holy Cross monk, and each of them are going to share some insight into their experience of Audrey's faith, her prayer life, how she reflected, and how she shared hope with others.
When Audrey retired, she came to my door and she told me that she was struggling with nothing to do, and she wanted me to give her something to do. She said, I could just do odd jobs around the office. I'll just do whatever you tell me to do. And I said, Audrey, you'd never do odd jobs around the office, and you'll certainly never do whatever I tell you to do. I said, but you could walk my dog. At the time, I had one Labrador retriever, and she was happy to take on that task. She came and walked my first Labrador with me, and she then came with me and chose my second Labrador when I got a second puppy as well. She walked those two dogs in the snow, often, in her 80s, and used to delight to tell people that sometimes they would pull her over in the snow. And this was hysterical to Audrey. Frightening to the rest of us, but hysterical to Audrey. Audrey had little regard for danger. We've already heard this from other people. She really did have little regard for danger. And you didn't just know this because of the way she would let dogs pull her over in the snow. You knew it because of how she lived her life and what she did with her life. And I would go so far as to say that Audrey had contempt for danger in many ways. But that's perhaps the flip side of the reality that Audrey had deep faith. And she had contempt for danger, I think, because she had deep faith. She was a person of tremendous confidence and faith in God, that God was and would always be the most benevolent force in her life and in the world. And her faith guided so much that Audrey did. Her faith was on display in many, many ways. Her faith didn't only inform her work, it also informed the way she talked with children about death, as we've heard from others that she did. She used to reminisce about that, and she was pleased that she was able to help children by sharing her own faith with them. Her faith informed where she was on Sundays. On Saturdays, she may have been at the barn, but on Sundays, she was in church. And she used to say, she did almost everything there is to do at St. Mark's in a leadership position. She used to say to me in her later years, she'd say, you know, this is my church. And she meant that possessively, I know, but she was very, very grateful for her relationship with her church and for the relationship she had with God in her church. Her faith was evident in the work that eventually she did with me in founding St. James School, which we knew was an endeavor of faith that had to be about the transformation of people's lives. And the reason that Audrey was invested in that work was because she was deeply invested in the transformation of people's lives. She shared her faith generously and easily, and she had in many ways a simple faith. She loved hymns in church, and she loved to be in church. And some of the members of St. Mark's Choir are here, who are going to, in just a few minutes, sing a couple of hymns that she particularly loved. A Welsh hymn that many of you will know, God that madest earth and heaven, and then a very well-known English hymn, Dear Lord and Father of Mankind. And I'm glad that there are members of our choir here who can sing those hymns to remember where it was that Audrey spent her Sunday mornings and what part of her life, her faith, that informed, I think, everything she did. And so it's easy to stand up here and to give thanks to God for making such a marvelous woman.
Good evening. I am Brother Bernard Delcourt. I am one of 15 monks who live at Holy Cross Monastery in West Park, New York. Our monastery is an Episcopalian community of monks who follow the rule of Saint Benedict. Yes, there are such things as Episcopalian nuns and monks. You can tell people you've seen one now. Our monastery is a haven of quiet on the banks of the River Hudson, 2 hours north of New York City. I have been a monk there for 19 years now. Monks pray and work in community. They also serve their region and the church with various ministries. Our main ministries are hospitality and spiritual direction, a form of God-centered counseling. Early in my monastic vocation, I met Audrey as one of our hundreds of yearly guests. She often stayed at our guest house for times of retreat from her many responsibilities. I know she started coming to the monastery on retreat in the early 1990s, well before I became a monk. I got to meet and know her as an adorable lady of a certain age. She would rest, hike, and attend our religious services several times a day. She loved to hear the monastic choir chant the Psalms. She would often close her eyes and smile in delight at being in our St. Augustine Church, listening to the divine office. She also loved to walk down to the river and skip rocks on the river with her friend Barbara Alton, who often accompanied her. Barbara inspired Audrey to become a Holy Cross associate in 2012, like herself. Our associates and our monastic community have a relationship of mutual prayer and support. Our associates draw up a rule of life inspired by Benedictine values and live accordingly, and so did Audrey. Our associates are an amazing bunch. Audrey fit right in. I imagine that when she was on retreat, Audrey also discerned what God was calling her to do in the many philanthropic undertakings of her life. But she was very humble and discreet that way. I only learned about her distinguished professional and philanthropic achievements in recent years, and mostly from people who knew her. She did not show off. She didn't need to. She was very humble. She often asked me to pray for people whom she knew and cared about. And we all know there were a great many of these. She'd write about who they were and might join a picture so that I could get personal in my prayer. When Audrey talked to me, I felt her full attention. She wanted to know about you. She looked you straight in the eyes, often with that mischievous sparkle in her gaze. She also imparted her impish humor in many conversations. Audrey valued her times of retreat at the monastery. She knew how much it supported her in her spiritual journey. If you are a seeker of God, consider treating yourself to what was so good for Audrey. Many religious communities have a ministry of hospitality. Do an internet search for a retreat house or retreat center near you and see what appeals to you. Or consider the 3 to 4 hour drive from Philly to my monastery and come say hello. The Mid-Hudson Valley is a great region to visit. I give thanks for all these years of knowing the Audrey who visited the monastery, the Audrey who was herself and didn't boast despite her right to. She and her protégés are in my prayers always. Thank you, Audrey.
Audrey was designed by God to care for children and families. Audrey's total care approach is well known, and many of us have sat with Audrey and watched her explain the total care approach by taking a napkin or a back of an agenda, and she drew that circle with the child in the middle, and she named all those that would surround the child. She did it at St. James many times. She also understood that the laborers were few, and she was very good at recruiting people to do the work at St. James and Ronald McDonald House. At St. James, we have around 36 employees, and they are laborers, and they do the work of Audrey Evans day in and day out. And we all share in that care, that total care approach. Tonight, we have 2 employees from St. James School who will share their vision of Audrey, and also a graduate of St. James. Come on up. Sarah Carroll and Kevin Todd, and also Tanae Drain.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name's Kevin Todd.
And I'm Sarah Carroll, and this is our lovely daughter, and we'd like to tell you our Audrey story.
I was lucky enough to join the team at St. James midway through our first year as a school.
I joined the team the following fall, and Dave and our principal at the time, Laura, assigned Kevin to my classroom as my teaching assistant.
Today, Sarah is regarded as a highly effective instructor who never has issues with behavior or managing our classroom. This was not always the case. There were times, more than one time, of challenging behavior, phone calls home, and even tears in the copy room. But I've had the distinct privilege of watching the evolution and improvement in her craft over time. She's come to master the firm but fair method of holding students to a high standard while sprinkling a bit of Dr. Evans herself by never letting them forget that she loves and cares for them deeply. Luckily for her, she had a strong and confident right-hand man in her classroom.
It took Kevin until April of that first school year to finally take every student's advice and ask me out on a date.
Dr. Evans was happy to hear about our newfound love, and I was happy to prove her wrong that no woman would take interest in me until I shaved my beard.
We cherished those early days of St. James with Dr. Evans and Dr. Dan. They would join us on Wednesdays for Mass, and then they would stay after for lunch with the students. The kids would fight. Hey, get over here. Thank you. The kids would fight over who got to sit next to Dr. Evans during Mass, who would hold her hand on the way to the church, and who would sit with her at lunch. They cared for her like their own grandmother, and in turn, she would spoil them like her grandmother did. Hugs and kisses, treats from her little red bag, and always cake on her birthday. Dr. Evans took a real and intimate interest in the personal lives of our students. Her response to every incident and every challenge was solutions-based, and it came from a place of love. Why can't we provide more food, transportation, an extra after-school tutor? We must, she would say. 6 whole years later, Kevin finally asked me to marry him, and I agreed. In August of 2020, we found out that we were pregnant with our first child.
And so commenced what all parents here are familiar with, the process of choosing a name. Everyone wants their children's name to have meaning or significance of some kind or another.
We were both somewhat hesitant to name our kids after someone because we thought it might apply too much pressure on them to be someone or something that they may not be. However, we both had this common friend and colleague who possessed a resolute and magnanimous spirit, whose life work exemplified what happens when these traits are directed towards making our world a better place.
So it is our hope that our Audrey here does not feel like a failure if she does not save lives, cure diseases, or open schools. But then when she hears her name, she will know her namesake was a woman who cared, and she will be reminded of the immense potential in each of us to do good.
Audrey, say hi to everybody. You say hi? No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tane Drain, and as some of you may know, I am a graduate of St. James School. I graduated over 7 years ago. Like, I'm old, like real old. I currently attend Holy Family University as a junior, and I major in biology. But even with being gone for so long, I have so many memories that would never leave me. It was the year of 2014, and we were sitting in the community room waiting for Mr. Kasovich to start the morning meeting. He comes in and tells us that he has a special announcement. He comes in and tells us that it's Dr. Evans' birthday. She was turning 88 years old, and that he wanted us to write a little something on a letter for her so she could take it with her on her birthday. So I wrote my card, and I wished her a happy birthday, and I thanked her for all that she's done for St. James. And at the end of my card, I wrote that we all loved her. So at lunch, when he gave her the letters, and gave her the cards, she read them out to everyone. But she picked my card out of everyone's. My card stood out to her. She read it out loud, and with her voice as timid as it was at the time, she asked, "You all love me?" And at that moment, we all yelled out, "Yes." The biggest smile was brought across her face. This stuck to me to this day because you could feel the love in the room. The love that we all had for her. And it was my letter that reminded her of that. We know that she crossed the bridge that we can't follow. We also know that once you cross that bridge, you can't take anything with you. But one thing she'll always be able to take with her is the love that we have for her, forever and always. We love you, Audrey. The next reading is from my friend Lachey. She couldn't make it tonight, but she still wanted me to share what she wrote on her behalf. So she says, "Hello, my name is Lachey Smith. If you guys don't know me, I'm a big part of the St. James community. I also graduated from St. James. I'm currently a senior at Cabrini University, majoring in digital communications and social media. I will also be an alumni at Cabrini University in less than 5 weeks. But let's take it back to the year of 2014. I guess everything happened in 2014. After singing for Mass at St. Mark's, the entire choir walked to Dr. Evans' apartment, and we had a blast. We knocked on her door, and she was so happy to see us. She greeted each and every one of us with a signature kiss on the cheek, and she pinched mine. She said that she loved us. Dr. Evans was so loving because even at 10 and 12 years old, she showed up to my house to this day, and I honestly just screamed. But that was the last thing that Dr. Evans would do. She asked us how our morning was. Did we eat breakfast? Did we enjoy Mass? And much more. She gave us a tour of her house and offered us bagels. Even showed us her outside porch. We were having so much fun. At the time, it was a popular app called Dubsmash. And all of us together made so many fun videos. I wish I had them today to show, but Dr. Evans showed us that still, she had the moves that day. This is my favorite memory of Dr. Evans. Dr. Evans was the grandmother that I never had. Every time she came to school, her warm, comforting hugs made us happy. She was just happy as I was when I became the student of the week or earned an improvement at St. James. We are attached to each and every day that Dr. Evans spent with us. We are attached to each other the very first day we met, and I will never forget the welcoming love that was there. Thank you.
striving cease. Take from our souls the strain and distress, and let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace, the beauty of thy peace. With all the heights of our desire, thy fullness and thy wrong, essence freedom, let fresh return, speak holy earthquake, wind and fire, oh, still small voice of God, oh, still small voice of God.
Thank you to the St. Mark's Choir. Thank you, Sarah, Kevin, Audrey, Tainé, and Lachey. In 2018, Audrey lost her beloved Dan, and her family and friends surrounded her with the love and support that she needed. During the last 4 years of her life, Audrey needed some extra assistance and support, although she reminded us daily that she didn't like rules. It was during this time she remained a teacher in many of our lives. She never lost her inquisitiveness, her humor, her interest in helping others, and her drive for everyone to care. Our two final speakers tonight talk about this time and the opportunity to capture her legacy to share the world. I would like to first invite Carrie Ann Richards to the stage, and then Julia Fisher-Fardman.
Dr. Evans, or AE as Dr. Dan would refer to her as, has been a part of our lives since 1996. The same year my mom, Norma, and I immigrated to the United States from Jamaica. There was no accident why my mom worked with AE on Mondays for 22 of the 26 years she had known her. Every day was a designated day for AE. Unfortunately, I don't remember all of them, but Monday was wash day, Friday was fish day, and of course, Sunday was God's day. Dr. Dan and Dr. Evans were sort of my extended grandparents. When they moved to their lovely apartment on the square, they would invite my mom and myself to lovely dinners all over Rittenhouse Square. When they would travel the world, Dr. Dan would write postcards from the various countries they had visited. When I went to the Marine Corps, it was emails. When speaking with family and friends, AE would brag about the fact that I was in the Marines. Well, you don't have a Marine taking care of you. You don't argue with Marines. Then she would pause and lean over and say, "We don't argue much, do we?" I would say no, but we do a lot of negotiations. In 2019, I began to fill in here and there to give a helping hand to my mom and AE. I would fill in where there may have been gaps in the caretaking schedule, so to speak. I would make her a cup of tea with 2 creams alongside 1 shortbread cookie, later to be upgraded to a chocolate chip cookie courtesy of Mrs. Barbara, a glass of sherry alongside 4 Ritz crackers with various cheese, and of course, supper. AE requested if I could lend a helping hand in the mornings. At that time, I couldn't commit any more time because my real estate career really began to take on momentum. But, as we all know, no one says no to AE. And I'm standing here because of that. Towards the end of AE's life, my mom and I moved in to help her with any additional help she needed, so that way she could continue to enjoy her lovely apartment. I don't for one moment regret this choice, because it was through that choice I was able to engage with, challenge, and listen to one of the greatest minds that has ever lived, a true Renaissance woman. It wasn't just the things AE would say. It wasn't just the things AE would say. It was the thought process behind it, how she even arrived at her conclusions. This includes her sense of humor. These would be life-changing conversations to me. My mom would walk into the apartment and ask, "What are you two up to? What are you two talking about?" And A would say, "Well, we're talking about how we're going to save the world." As one does on a Tuesday afternoon. It was through these conversations where I learned about the pain she carried for decades for her brother Pat, who had been killed in World War II. It was through these conversations where I learned about the unexplainable love and bond she shared with Dr. Dan. It was through these conversations where I learned how her father taught her the haves must help those who have not. It was through these conversations where I learned of her love for fizzy wine. It was through these conversations where I saw her infectious smile, the light in her eyes, and the, of course, contagious laugh. And it was through these conversations where I learned how AE cared for her patients when they were sick and also when they were dying. What a gift it was for all of us to give Dr. Evans the same love, care, and support that she had given over her 6-decade-long career. That we could return one of the most notable and noble things she had done for children and their families at their lowest. I believe I speak on behalf of her friends who played a part in her caretaking: my mom, Mrs. Barbara, Carl Danjo, Fiona, Mara, Brother Charlie, Dr. Maris, Julia, Susan Campbell, Chloe, Ozzie, Felix, Marley, and myself, that it was an absolute blessing to be a part of something so special. Thank you.
Thanks for staying with us till the end. This has been an amazing, amazing night. For those of you I don't know, I am Julia Fisher-Farbman, and I've had the privilege of knowing and loving Audrey for 3 decades. I'm also, as you guys have coined me, the movie lady, and I'm the writer and producer of the upcoming feature film, Audrey's Children, about her life. Before I start talking about Audrey, I'd like to first thank Susan Campbell and David Kasevich. Can we give them a round of applause? And their teams. Everything from Lamb Audrey to all the speeches tonight. I know for sure that this event would have been something that Audrey not only would have approved of, but as Ginny said earlier, would have lovingly snuck out of already. Watching the Modern Hero clip at the start of the program took me right back to that life-changing interview 6 years ago. As someone who interviewed dignitaries and celebrities, I thought I was prepared for anyone. That was until Dr. Audrey Evans. Now, I had always known Audrey as a rock star, an iconic superhero-like figure who swooped in to save lives and disappeared before anyone even knew she was there. But it wasn't until this interview that I realized it was the lens for which she saw the world that made her one of a kind. To put it simply, as everyone has said here tonight, she believed we were put on earth to care. She saw life's largest challenges as minor setbacks. She found humor in the darkest hours and saw joy in the simple things. She found purpose in serving others. She led with love, gratitude, a wicked sense of humor, and sometimes unconventional approach that might be rule-bending to life and to work that led to monumental change here in Philadelphia and all around the world. In a word, she was magic. Though our age gap spanned 60 years, Audrey and I connected in our souls. I knew on a visceral level that we were meant to be in each other's lives in this exact moment to embark on a transformational journey together, a journey of making a movie about her life. Now, at the time, I had never written or produced a feature film. It was a very out there idea to write a screenplay, raise the money, staff the project, and do it in a few short years. But in Audrey fashion, there was no alternative. It was not just a movie to me, it's a calling on my heart. Now, that's all fine and lovely, but there was still one thing I had to do. I needed the boss to sign off on a story being made about her life. And if you knew Audrey, you knew she was going to make me work for it. Naturally, I took Audrey to Park to schmooze her and make my big pitch. But I quickly realized that I didn't impress her at all by getting into this Philly hotspot because she was literally a celebrity there and she could get a table anytime she wanted. She then went on to explain that water is a no-no, fizzy wine is a must, and there's no need to look at the menu. A mushroom tart or mushroom soup, whatever they had that day, followed by the warm shrimp salad is what we both would get. We'd end with some coffee with 2 little creamers, a tiny little treat, followed by a walk around Rittenhouse Square, where we'd fawn over every little child, hand out dog treats from her iconic red tote, and give out money to the homeless, many of whom Audrey knew by name, and who she felt very comfortable giving her money to, and also mine. So I gave her my whole song and dance as to why we needed to make this movie, and how I believed it was going to change the world. Finally, she stopped me and agreed, with a few conditions. Number 1, that it will make a difference in the lives of children. Okay, check, I can do that. Number 2, when we go to the Oscars, not if, but when, that she would be escorted by a handsome group of men, which she had already hand-selected, and she would be wearing a sparkly gold dress that was already hung up in her closet. No pressure or anything. And finally, our only sticking point, she wanted to play herself. Now, I very thoughtfully explained to Audrey that the movie takes place in 1969 when she's in her 40s, and that now being in her 90s, it might be a bit of a tough sell. She did not like that at all. Without missing a beat, arms crossed, eyebrows raised, absolutely deadpan, she said, "That is what makeup and virtual effects are for. You do know how movies work, don't you?" This was very much an ongoing negotiation for years, until the day came that the incredible actress Natalie Dormer signed on to star in the film. Finally, Audrey relented that if someone had to play her, that we indeed found the perfect Audrey. And I couldn't agree more. Natalie brought brilliance, passion, and an Audrey-like ferocity that is breathtaking. Now I'd like to pause for a moment and introduce a video from my friend Natalie.
Hello everyone, it's Natalie Dormer here. I must apologise for not being with you today. I would have done anything within my power to do so, but I am in South Africa shooting a TV show here, and I feel if anyone would understand and forgive the call to adventure and pre-made commitments, it would be Audrey. So I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person, but I'm very much with you in spirit. I just wanted to send a quick message to say that truly playing Audrey in our little film, Audrey's Children, written and produced by the wonderful Julia Fisher-Farbman, who is amongst you today. Playing Audrey has definitely been one of the greatest privileges of my career to date, and I'm sure if I reach the grand age that she did, I'm sure it will remain on the top handful, if not the top honor of my career, very rarely do you get such an opportunity to play such an inspiring human being. And I feel that I can join your ranks today, though I didn't know her personally in the way that many of you in that room today did. I feel as if I'm one of you because having the unique situation of studying another human being in order to play them, understanding and the sheer hours of research on their life, personal and professional, gives a very specific insight. And I like to think a little bit of residue. If a tiny bit of residue has stayed with me to give me the courage, gusto, determination, infinite compassion, smarts, and humour that Audrey had, I'd be a very lucky woman. She truly was an extraordinary human being in the true sense of the word, and I had the great honour to meet her in her last weeks and hold her hand and tell her what a privilege it was. Today is a celebration. I know some of the stories. I can imagine the laughter and the tears that will be flowing. And all I can say is I'm sending a massive hug to all of you. High fives and fist bumps to the children. And I hope from the very depth of my heart that when you will watch Audrey's children, that you might feel we have captured the film production, the producers, the director, the writer, and myself and the other cast members, that we have captured just a quarter of the phenomenon that was Dr. Audrey Evans, the trailblazer, the medical revolutionary, the gorgeous human being, and of her and Dan. And if you feel that we've done that and you recognize just a tiny bit of her, then I can rest happy. It's an honor to be able to send you this message today. My love to everyone, and here's to Audrey from all over the world. That's the point, right? She touched people from all over the world, so I am furthering that claim right here. Take care.
Thank you so much, Natalie. In case it isn't clear, we all love Audrey. From our special cast, that includes, of course, Natalie Dormer, Jimmy Simpson as Dan Danjo, and Clancy Brown as Dr. C. Everett Koop, our visionary director, Amy Kanan-Mann, our producing team, all of whom were able to spend time with Audrey before she passed. To every single person on the cast and crew, this movie was more than a job. It is a mission to bring back these heroes to life and to carry on a legacy of hope. Now, it took 5 years from having the idea to finishing the film just 2 weeks ago, and during that time, I had the honor of spending every single week with Audrey up until she passed. I'm almost done, I promise, guys. We'd hang out in her nook amongst photos of loved ones, stuffed animals, and fresh flowers, Norma and Carrie Ann, of course. We'd eat chocolates, sip tea, skim Talbot sales, and recount her life. I can honestly say summing up 97 years into a single screenplay was just as hard as it was to narrow my memories for today's reflections. Thankfully, many were shared here tonight, but I would be remiss if I didn't share how proud Audrey was to have been a woman who made it in the world of men. Whenever she experienced sexism or discrimination, or were told that that's just the rules of the world and the faster you learn, the better off you'll be, she went on to write her own rules, and she looked at the good. When there were no locks on the bathroom doors, she sang in the shower so her male residents didn't come in. Or when she wasn't allowed to eat with her male resident colleagues, she would tell me about a lovely chef who would save her the best food and sit with her and eat there so she didn't have to eat alone. Equally, she had a profound gratitude for the allies who lifted her up along the way, like her partner in work and later in love, Dr. Dan. And I love seeing his family here, their family here today. Like a yin and yang, they were total opposites. Audrey, audacious, sneaking animals into hospital rooms. Dan, straight and narrow and soft-spoken, yet they shared a brilliant mind and a singular purpose to save their children. And together, he in his signature bow tie and she in her floral dress changed the trajectory of pediatric cancer forever. And when all avenues were exhausted, Audrey, as others have said tonight, had the unique ability to talk to children about heaven and take the fear of dying away while she worked around the clock to save their lives. As Audrey would say, it was a calling to her. The long hours she spent helping people filled her soul. And the long hours I spent with Audrey filled mine. She would tell me to buck up and finish this thing so people can get home, so here we go. Our time together was so much more than a movie. We celebrated birthdays and holidays, ate all the cheese DeBruno's had to offer, visited horses and had dinner parties, shared walks around the park feeding the birds and just talking about life. She changed my life in every sense, and I like to believe in a small way I positively impacted hers. Each time I'd leave, she'd make a pouty face and say, "When will I be back?" I'd tell her next week, and she'd say, "That's too long." And I'd say, "Audrey, I'm making a movie about your life, and you've done a lot of things, so I have work to do." She'd sit up straight and say, "You're right. If we're gonna do it right, so get to work." I'd tell her I love her, and she'd smile at me with all the love in her heart and say, "Next time, bring your handsome husband, Jared." With a twinkle in her eyes, she'd burst out in that infectious way that only Audrey could, and she'd blow me a kiss. We shared a love that you don't always need to say, but you always feel. Like you, I now carry her with me in my heart everywhere I go. I try to smile at strangers and hold open doors, to see the good in people even when it's hard, to take a step away from an endless to-do list and appreciate that we are here, all of us in this moment, with the gift of life. Audrey exemplified that to be alive is a gift and a responsibility. We are here for one simple reason, to help one another, and we must. Now, if it were the Oscars, the Wrap It Up music would have played like 10 times by now. So, before I overstay my welcome more than I already have, I'd like to end on an Audrey reflection from one of our final conversations together. She told me that at the end of your life, you're full of memories, and how lovely it had been to reflect on the moments that meant the most to her. When I asked her what she is most proud of, she said, and I quote, "My children. Though I never had children from my body, I had them from my heart." We are all Audrey's children, and though there never would have been a good time for her to transition to heaven, in a way she's been preparing all of us for this moment during her time on earth. She's given us a roadmap on how to live a mission-driven life, how to care at all costs, how to believe that one person can change the world just as she did. And if we ever get lost, just look towards the light. Just look towards the light that is Audrey. She shines bright in all of us here and in the hearts of millions around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. So here we are. We're at the end. We traveled this journey tonight, and we're starting where we began. We're reviewing your homework that we gave you. So how are you? How are we recommitting to the work of caring for children and families entrusted to our care? And what are we carrying that's new tonight that we learned about Audrey's caring service to others?
Audrey loved flowers and literally stopped and smelled the roses. Each spring, she enjoyed buying flowers to fill her pots and containers on her terrace. She also liked to pick a flower while leaving church and place the single flower in a small vase for the week to remind her that she had gone to church. In that spirit, we invite you at the end of this program to come up and pick one of the flowers from these beautiful arrangements. Place it in a small vase and remember Audrey, a woman who cared. We'd now like to complete our program by inviting the Reverend Andrew Kellner to the stage to close our program with a benediction. Thank you.
A blessing is not just something for ourselves. A blessing is something that we take into the world with us and that we get to share with all those around us. It's also a commitment to participate in that blessing, that we use our gifts, our lives, to pay it forward, to share it with those around us. To that end, I'd invite you to stand as you're able, please. My friends, having celebrated Audrey's life and celebrated it well, I invite you to commit yourself, to recommit yourself to living a life of care. Will you look? Will you see? Will you acknowledge the need for care that surrounds us all? If so, I invite you to say, we will with God's help. We will with God's help. Will you hold to the truth that each need for care is holistic and more than just the symptoms that we see? If so, say, we will with God's help. We will with God's help. Will you understand and remember that each need for care also includes families and friends and loved ones, and that they too need care? If so, say, we will with God's help. We will with God's help. Will you use your skills, your knowledge, your love, and your presence to care for those around you? So say, we will with God's help. We will with God's help. And now, my friends, go and share care with all those that you meet, sharing Audrey's message of love and of God's presence through our care. And the blessing of God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you this night and remain with you forever. Amen.